It's time to call out the extreme dishonesty around the so-called migration crisis and be real about what actually needs to happen. The Claudia and Karina campaign and the PSL have 5 immediate proposals that go totally against what both the Democrats and the Republicans are talking about. Number 1, lift all sanctions against Cuba and Venezuela and normalize relations. Number 2, eliminate the predatory relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean, and the world over, frankly. U.S. corporations drag us into wars we have no business in for their narrow and short-term profits. Number 3, full rights for all immigrants. We have to stop the super exploitation of millions of working people. No more double standards that pit poor and working people against each other. Number 4, demilitarize the border. And number 5, overhaul U.S. labor laws to enforce wage standards and to make it easy for workers of all backgrounds to join unions. Now, these are all outside of the box for Washington conventional politics, but that's because they actually get to the root of the problem. The reality is, the ruling class likes having undocumented people, as long as they can super exploit them and use them as political scapegoats. And while there is an aspect of migration that's timeless and normal throughout the whole span of humanity, what's happening now is man-made. The reality is, most people would prefer to build a life for themselves and their families in their own countries. That some are willing to risk life and limb to try to make it here, where most are treated terribly and forced to live without benefits and rights, this is nothing to celebrate. In fact, it shows that something is profoundly wrong about the world. And we have to ask, who caused this and who benefits? First, Cuba and Venezuela. As of last fall, an estimated 30% of new migrants at the border were from Cuba and Venezuela, with Venezuela topping the list. This didn't come out of nowhere. The U.S. has deliberately pursued a strategy of economic blockades and sanctions to strangle these countries' economies. It costs these countries tens of millions of dollars per day. It has collapsed their currencies, wiped out their savings, but not only that, it actually wipes out the idea of a future for millions of young people in both countries. And that is the greatest tragedy. But this is the playbook the U.S. always uses when a country dares to be independent, to be sovereign or socialist. They do everything they can to create turmoil from within. And then they create special immigration programs and economic enticements to lure people to the United States as the land of opportunity. Any politician who is talking about the problem of Venezuelan and Cuban immigrants, who isn't talking about ending the sanctions, allowing these countries to trade normally, and returning to them their billions in frozen assets, those politicians are absolute frauds. Second, we need to eliminate the predatory relationship with all of Latin America and the Caribbean. As of September, close to 3 million migrants have come to the United States. If we consider where people are coming from and where they've come historically in mass, we can see the correlation between a history of U.S. military interventions, Wall Street looting, and migration. Puerto Rico has experienced waves of migration as a result of the economic crisis on the island, a symptom of its oppression as a colony. Haiti has been the object of several U.S. military interventions since 1916, and Haiti's current political and economic turmoil is the result of U.S. capitalism, plain and simple. Claudia's parents migrated from the Dominican Republic as a result of the U.S.-backed coup of 1963 and the invasion of 1965, which led to tens of thousands of deaths and political and economic instability. My parents migrated from Mexico in the early 80s as a consequence of the nationwide economic collapse that was engineered largely by neoliberal Western economists. And they made things even worse in the 90s with NAFTA. We all know the mass displacement of so many Mexicans who lost their livelihood as a result of U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. dirty wars and its backing of brutal regimes in Central American countries have driven people to the United States in waves. We need to end these imperialist interventions and replace them with dignified and respectful trade relations and reparations with these countries to overcome the inequality and underdevelopment that has been imposed on them by U.S. corporate greed. That is the real answer. Then people won't need to leave their countries to build a future. Third, full rights for all immigrants. The politicians like to say that this is rewarding criminality, but this is a trick. We all know that most immigrants are actually the victims of capitalism, of an international and capitalist system where capital and weapons are allowed to travel freely across the borders. But then the laborer who chases the value of the goods that have been stolen by US corporations, they get criminalized. And who does this ultimately serve? If immigrants are forced to live in the shadows without equal rights, they're gonna be paid low wages, they're gonna have lower standards, and that's gonna affect all of us. If people are so worried about immigrants not paying taxes, which is not even true, then give them full rights so they can get social security numbers and so they can participate equally in society. There is a bill that's being proposed right now to rectify this injustice, and it's a simple procedure to update the registry. It would be a big step forward, because it would allow anyone who has been in the country for 7 years without incident to qualify for permanent residency and become legal. It used to be the norm in this country that after a period of time, you could qualify for status. But with the weaponization of the migration crisis, it hasn't been updated for 37 years. And it's meant that people have been living in the shadows for decades. As a step towards full legalization, we support the bill to update the registry, and we want all of our supporters to do so as well. Fourth, demilitarize the border. It is absolutely inhumane what is happening at the border these days. It's disgusting to see Biden and the Republicans argue about who can totally seal the border first, who can be the most right-wing. Biden ran in 2020 as if he was going to be the opposite of Trump, but now, just like Obama, he has adopted the same far-right program on immigration. The militarized border has taken so many casualties over the last decades, pushing people further and further into the most dangerous parts of the desert. And it's just getting worse and more violent. No politician will ever say is that the militarized border also keeps people in the country who would otherwise want to return home. For decades, really ever since the Southwest was stolen from Mexico, Latin American and Mexican immigration was cyclical. People would come for a few years to work, they would earn money, and then they would go back home and come back. But now, with the militarization of the border, the risks are too great. Fifth, we need to radically overhaul labor laws to prevent the capitalist class from pitting immigrant labor against US workers. This is what drives down wages and working conditions in this endless race to the bottom. There are 1,850 labor law inspectors in the United States. These inspectors are responsible for the health and safety of 130 million workers. This is ridiculous. These 130 million workers are employed at more than 8 million work sites around the country. This translates to 1 inspector for every 70,000 workers. No wonder wage theft is so rampant in this country. No wonder they're always violating labor laws. We need to strengthen labor protections, and we also need to make it way easier for workers to join a union. Simply signing cards so that workers can collectively bargain and collectively go after bosses who steal their wages and violate their rights. We can close these massive loopholes and end this ridiculously low enforcement of US labor laws that allows predatory capitalists to make super profits. It is unconscionable, the conditions that people are living in, who pick our food, who serve our meals, and take care of our children in the year 2024. And the answer is not to get rid of the worker, but to legalize and empower all workers. Right now, the immigration system is a win-win for the capitalist class. Think about it. They super exploit people in their home countries, extract all the resources, and then when people flee those miserable conditions, they are super exploited here. Again, the answer is to make a win-win for the working class. End the super exploitation of Latin America and the Caribbean. And for those who do come here, end their super exploitation. So we're working together here. Let's have a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. The US labor movement was made strong by immigrant workers. From the fight for an 8-hour workday in the 1880s to the recent revival of organizing today. This is our future, but we have to get organized. We have to get organized around our common interests. We gotta stop the hate, stop the bigotry, and unite against our common enemy, the capitalist class and their system of poverty and death.